I say, I want the knife. Welcome to the Hey Guys podcast with Liam and Rob. This week we are looking back at the movie that, wishes it was Big Trouble in Little China, which is a bizarre thing to say, actually, because this film made so much more money than Big Trouble in Little China, but I feel like history hasn't been nearly as kind to it. It's quite a strange situation there.
And the other thing that John Carpenter was meant to direct this film, but went on then to do Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, you just kind of can't escape the connections between these two films. I mean, when I watch this film, it's like, okay, what happens if you combined Beverly Hills Cop with Big Trouble in Little China? It is literally the golden child. Because this has so many similarities. I mean, even with Beverly Hills Cop, the way this movie starts, you think about the start of Beverly Hills Cop, which we did a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. It has that kind of throwback to, this was Detroit in 1984. This very much as an intro, the same kind of style where it's like, this is LA in 1986. Obviously, you get the supernatural stuff first.
Yeah.
But that's juxtapositioned, as it were, with this kind of like, this is American society as of 1986. Only this time, it's got like Eddie Murphy, like shadow boxing with strangers, giving flowers to random women, and then having a conversation with a man in the street about chunky asses. I mean, I'm not sure how cool that is. If a guy is at a newsstand reading a porno mag called Chunky Asses, you leave him be, as far as I'm concerned.
I do love how he didn't know the name of the porno at first. He's just reading over his shoulder. And I think, it was like ass salad or something he was going. And
yeah, like ass cake, something like that.
And he's going as a sequel to ass pie. And then the guy puts it down and runs away. And then he realizes the name of it and he just yells out, Chunky Asses!
Chunky. I mean, that's not cool, but it does serve as, I think, a timely reminder to the youth of today of what people had to go through back in the 80s, back in the 90s to get pornography. If you wanted chunky asses, you couldn't just type it into Google. You had to go to a newsstand and buy chunky asses. Although I will admit, it is pretty brazen of him to stand there at the newsstand and just read chunky asses. Like, people would go there usually under the cover of night. You'd buy your porno mag and just sneak out the door, I assume. I mean, but this guy's just like, fair play to him, pretty confident to just stand there and be like, in broad daylight, and be like, I'm going to read my chunky asses.
Well, for us,
God damn it.
Because we don't have newsstands, we have news agents, so it's all enclosed. It's a normal shop. You're picking up your readers' wives or Razzle or whatever it is, and then slipping it in between the Sun and the Daily Mirror.
That's the general approach, although I always appreciated the rare human being who would just go in and have the confidence to just browse the porn section, just in the middle of the day, just like, listen, this is what I'm about. Everybody poops, so to speak. I'm just going to stand here and, read the porn before I pick which one I want. I mean, it's a bold move. I would never have the confidence for it. But this man was weak. He had the confidence, but the moment Eddie Murphy showed up over his shoulder, he's like, I got to get out of here, which is fair enough.
It's like renting, and I love the fact that this entire film, this is what we fixated on first. But it's like renting a VHS, isn't it? You would because obviously films came out, you didn't have trailers back in the 80s, things like that. On a Friday night, you're renting a film with the family and you're reading the synopsis on the back. Yeah. So that's what people are doing. Which is the best porno mag to take home for the weekend? Let's have a peruse first and see which one we want.
I feel like you're getting a lot just from the title. I feel like Chunky Asses, you're pretty much getting, I know what I'm going to get.
You know what you're getting.
I don't feel like Chunky Asses needs a synopsis, personally. But hey, we're moving on, I suppose. So going back to the similarities between these two films. Well, no, I just think it's interesting. Like, as you already mentioned, the fact that John Carpenter was due to direct this film, which I think would make it a very different. I mean, basically, what it would make it is Big Trouble in Little China, starring Eddie Murphy instead of Kurt Russell, basically. Yeah. But the fact that he pushed his movie forward, like they rushed it into production to get it ahead of this, and you can see why, because these films are so similar. They've got that Asian mysticism. They've got that level of, it's a comedy, but not really. Again, like Beverly Hills Cop. What you've got is, if you've got a different star in the lead role for this film, it's not a comedy in any way. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it was supposed to be Mel Gibson originally, based on the original screenplay. And you just think, the film...
Is Eddie Murphy the second choice? Because we did Beverly Hills Cop 2 weeks ago, and it was going to be Sylvester Stallone, and it was going to be an action comedy. And then obviously became Eddie Murphy. And this one now, Big Trouble in Little China, The Golden Child, The Golden Child was going to be, as you've just said, Mel Gibson, and that was going to be more action orientated again. And then he went away, and now they brought in Eddie Murphy, and they turned it into what we see.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can feel it in both films. Like, these don't, I mean, they feel like Eddie Murphy films subsequently because Eddie Murphy is such a big character and he's so great in these films, you know, he's kind of so overbearing. And I don't mean that in a negative way. But when you see the structure of both of those films, the thing that stands out is like you take Eddie Murphy out of this film and it's no longer a comedy. All the comedy comes from Eddie. No one else is playing it for laughs. And it's very much the same here. And I mean, it's the nature of mid-80s cinema that you get a lot of the same characters. I mean, Tommy Tong showing up again, you know, Rain from Big Trouble in Little China. I'm pretty sure he's stolen some of the weapons from, you know, what are they called? The three guys? The three Storms.
Yeah,
the three Storms.
Like one of the hook knives things was...
I'm pretty sure he just stole that from one of his buddies in that film. You know, it's got Egg Chen. There's, like I said, tonally, there's so many similarities. And one of the things actually... you know, going back to this film, because I hadn't seen it for a long time, was just how weird this film gets. Like, at first, I was like, oh, it feels more like an Eddie Murphy film. But by the end, this doesn't feel a million miles away from Big Trouble in Little China in terms of how bonkers it actually goes. It never quite goes to those levels. But I just find it amazing that these two films came out. And I think it's like a throwback to... Remember, like, for a while, you'd always get two films which were basically the same, came out the same year. You'd get, like, Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Yeah.
I always said Joe Dante. Dante's Inferno, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Dante's
House on Haunted
Peak.
Hill and The Haunting. They were both out.
Sorry, Dante's Peak and Volcano.
Yeah.
All these films, you know, they would just make it at the same time. And just by chance, they made both of these films. But yeah, it's just interesting that this film made so much more money. You know, I had it in my head that this film wasn't a hit. I thought it flopped. It was the 8th biggest film of the year. It made 136 million back in 1986. It's a huge hit. But nobody talks about The Golden Child anymore, whereas Big Trouble in Little China, which totally flopped, just had this super long tail.
Big Trouble in Little China went down the cult status rule, and this just
100%.
This just, I don't know, it fell into obscurity pretty much, probably because as an Eddie Murphy vehicle in the 80s, it's overshadowed and overpowered by the long list that we've said many times that he's done in the 80s, which, again, that list, one thing we've done, this is our 3rd Eddie Murphy film on this podcast, right? And we've never actually gone back to discuss, because his age is timeless, but his age, he was 23 in Beverly Hills Cop. He's 25 in this film. This dude could be in his 30s and his 40s for all I know. Like, he is ageless. He is timeless. And who played his love interest?
In this?
Charlotte Lewis, Keenan. 18.
Was she 18?
18. I was so shocked.
I thought she was like 30.
No, 18.
Don't get me wrong, a very beautiful 30, but I thought she was, and maybe it's because she's so competent. And again, just to bring up one last similarity between those two films, it's not so obvious, although a lot of people miss it with Big Trouble in Little China, which I find bemusing. But the whole idea that you've got the American hero who's front and center. But Eddie Murphy, for the most part, is actually useless in this film. Again, it's actually the Asian character who is really fundamentally the hero. Like, you keep asking yourself, it's like, why is he the chosen one? Why does it need to be Eddie Murphy when Keenan seems outrageously competent and supernaturally powered, you know?
What I wanted to bring up about this film as well, this film could have been over quicker than how those two fell in love, by the way. I know Love at First Sight, but Jesus Christ, love in 30 seconds?
You don't buy it, do you?
No, not at all.
No.
But this film could have been over so quick if he would just ask that bird for directions.
Yeah.
I love, and I'm going straight to the end here. I know they've hinted that he's followed this bird a couple of times, but she's dead. She's been shot with a crossbow, but that's okay because there's a cure for a crossbow shot. It's the Golden Child, which, I believe that. That's absolutely fine with everything that's going on. So he said, all right, I need to find a child now. People have been looking him for weeks, for months. I've had to go to Tibet to get a knife to look for him. Okay, now I'm going to get in my car because I have less than a day to save the woman I'm in love with. Oh, that bird. Okay, I'll follow that bird. Okay, there's the Golden Child there. All right, I'm done. Film's over.
Yeah, it's amazing considering how badass what's his name, Numsi's supposed to be, and his gang, you know, and you think of all the length, like you say, the lengths they've gone to Tibet. I mean, their journey from Kathmandu to Tibet is mental, by the way. Just to be clear, that's 600 kilometers. And they go by boat and yak. Yeah, okay, sure, whatever. There's a lot of issues with this film. But like you say, he finds the bird, and then he just walks the fuck into their, evil mansion in the middle of the Hollywood Hills or wherever the hell it is. And it's just, there's no bodyguards. There's no one there. I mean, there's the two goons who kind of support, like the useless goons. Is it Fee and Till or something like that?
One was Fool, wasn't it? Didn't he call him Fool, or was that?
Fu and Till. That was it. Yeah. I mean, they're very much that's a throwback to those kind of 80s like duo goons. They're very much the kind of live action Bebop and Rocksteady, you know? Like they look weird and they're pretty useless. But yeah, considering like how powerful he's supposed to be, he just kind of just strolls into his mansion at the end of the film. He follows a bird. He goes, and I think again, and we've said this so many times with previous films, it's because they're obsessed with making these movies 90 minutes long. They're like, wait, shouldn't it be more of a journey? Shouldn't it be harder for him to get into the mansion? Shouldn't there be some kind of relationship there before they fall in love? No time for that. No time. We've only got 90 minutes and we've got all this spiritual shit to deal with. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I just didn't buy their relationship at all. I didn't, like, out of the blue, she seems to fall in love with him. The only thing, and it's a similar problem we've had with other Eddie Murphy films, is the fact that they imply relationships, but this is the 80s, and obviously they're not ready to show anything sexual on screen with a black dude, certainly not with a black guy and a white woman, and they're obviously pretty sheepish about a black guy and an Asian lady, because they get together, they kiss once at the very end of the film, but all the sex is totally implied. I mean, they might as well just play a saxophone and just kind of cut to the next scene.
Yeah,
because you don't see anything.
I didn't spend the night with you out of obligation. I spent the night with you because I love you. Like, motherfucker, you met this dude 45 seconds ago.
Yeah, I thought it was totally out of obligation. I think she wanted to get him to Kathmandu personally. But let's be clear, for the most part, all these scenes are just to get Ki Nang in some level of undress, because she's such a serious character. Like, she's so kind of, she really should be the hero of the film, but they lamely go out of their way. Like the first action scene with a biker gang where she's wearing a white top and she is needlessly soaked in water.
Before that, because they dress her like a librarian, and then when she goes into kick-ass mode, she takes it off. She, as you said, gets needlessly wet. And they were like, you don't need a bra for this scene. It's fine.
No, definitely not.
You go in there and you go in, 18.
I still can't believe she's 18. And they double down on it. I mean, there's that scene where she gets a top needlessly wet and doesn't wear a bra. There's the dream sequence, which we'll get to, which is bonkers, by the way, where it's like a needlessly light bondage scene, where she's dressed in kind of leathers and tied up with tissue paper. That's bonkers. And then the final scene, when, again, she's just not wearing pants. It's like everyone's got, we have to go now. There's no time for you to put pants on. You're going to need to do this fight scene with just a shirt and no pants. That's just the nature of the beast.
He had time to put a shirt on.
Oh, yeah. She didn't have time to put those pants on, though. You're doing this fight with as little clothing as possible.
I love Charles Dance, who I want to get to in a minute, but I love when he shot the arrow and she does all these needless flips. And it's just perfect. And he waited until she was right in front of him before she shot the arrow. Like, he could have shot the arrow at any time because she was coming in from diagonal.
He really could have. And Charles Dance, I mean, I love Charles Dance, and he's so, evil. But in this film, his character, I don't know, man, he just feels like relentlessly incompetent. Like, he's constantly talking a good game, but my God.
I thought he was wearing lifts, right? Especially when he was stood next to Eddie Murphy. But then I looked up their heights. Charles Dance is with us. He's 6'3".
He's a big guy.
He is a big dude. And Eddie Murphy is like 5'5".
Yeah, but he's at least 6'2" with the hat. You've got to take that goddamn hat into consideration.
But because I'm looking at this film and he's against Eddie Murphy, and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, is he wearing lifts? Is he stood on a box? No, motherfucker is actually really tall.
He is really tall, although he is another example. Like, I'm about to turn 40, and for the most part, I feel pretty confident about turning 40. Like, I don't feel like there's a freak out on the cards. However, I feel like a lot of these rewatches is trying to push me towards a freak out, because a couple of weeks ago, there was Beverly Hills Cop, and I found out that I'm now older than Taggart is in Beverly Hills Cop, and that dude looks about 60.
Yeah.
And now I watch The Golden Child, and I'm like, I'm older than Charles Dance was in that film.
Yeah.
And I'm like, or at least the same age, and I'm like, fuck, man, that guy looks like a proper grown-up. And I know I should feel like a grown-up about to turn 40, but I don't. I suspect that Charles Dance wasn't doing a movie podcast as he was about to turn 40.
When we were kids and we were seeing people our age, you're thinking, Jesus Christ, you're old. Now I get to that age, I'm like, well, no, I was 15 like 2 years ago. No, I wasn't. I was 15 like 25 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like, I don't like going back and seeing The Golden Child and like, oh, how long ago was this made? Like, wait, 36 years ago? Yeah. Holy shit. So a lot of these films now, they're fundamentally reminding me that I am, if nothing else, old as fucking dirt, which is quite depressing, but never mind. So yeah, I'm as old as Charles Dance was in The Golden Child, and I feel like that might push me towards an earring and a motorbike in the next couple of months.
As I'm looking at you now, take it into consideration that you're looking good. And is that a grey hair?
No. What are you talking about? Jesus Christ. Speaking of looking ridiculous, I mean, we mentioned it briefly. How do we feel about Eddie Murphy's get-up in this film? Because I feel like, we took, like, last week we did Indiana Jones, and obviously a big part of Indiana Jones, going back to watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, is that they were establishing a silhouette. Like, even beyond him being, Harrison Ford, that almost didn't matter. They were like, well, this is going to be a famous character, and we're building a look for this character. So you add the hat and everything. And I feel like to a certain extent, they must have been doing it with this film, because there's no other excuse to give him a hat, which I have never seen before or since. I think that hat just exists in this film, and that is all.
Because he's got the hat, he feels like he's a member of the Black Panther movement.
It does, but none of his characters, like, nothing else backs that up.
No.
Like if there was something in the script to support that, I'd be like, oh, okay, fair enough. But instead, you just got Eddie Murphy wearing a strange cap.
We won't reiterate it in facts. I'll say it now. The script wasn't, the overall product wasn't what the script wasn't the script that Eddie Murphy had. So he was upset with the final product apparently,
and so was the scriptwriter.
Yeah, because there was a lot more in the script than what was on screen. So I'd like to get my hands on this, because we've said it a couple of times before. I think, what did I say for Nightbreed? There is definitely a better film trying to come through.
100%, yeah.
Like there's something trying to come through. I mean, in this case, it's probably Big Trouble in Little China that's trying to come through. But yeah. For some reason, I don't know whether it's pressure from the studio, pressure from the producers, but yeah, something has gone amiss on the final product. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying something different to what they're trying to pull off.
No, and I think that's supported by some of the stories you read about this. So, I mean, Dennis Feldman wrote the screenplay for this, and it was originally called The Rose of Tibet. Yeah. And he was very much going for like a Raymond Chandler style movie with supernatural elements. And you've got to believe that that's the reason that Eddie Murphy's name in this film is Chandler Jarrell. And I mean, I don't buy Eddie Murphy as being called Chandler. I mean, he's a black guy. I mean, Chandler is the kind of name you give to a white accountant. I mean, it's bizarre. So it's obviously a nod to what Dennis Feldman was trying to do with the original screenplay. And, when the screenplay was available, it was a big deal. You've got to think, in 1986, Eddie Murphy is one of the biggest stars in the world. And he had his choice of screenplays, and he picked this over a lot of others. And even John Carpenter said it was only because he wanted to do Big Trouble in Little China so much. He's like, this is a really good script and screenplay. It's got its problems, but there's a really good film in here if they can make it work. And I think that eventually the studio got, basically, they couldn't decide which way to go. And obviously by editing Eddie Murphy in 1986, you have a pressure to turn it into an Eddie Murphy film. And they actually felt, even after the film was completed, they went back, and you can feel it in certain elements of the film, certainly the last shot, which is very awkward, that they needed more comedy in it. Like the scene in Nepal at the airport, it's quite funny, but it doesn't fit with the rest of the film when it just feels like suddenly Eddie Murphy's doing a skit. Yeah. They're like, oh, we need more laughs in this film. And it kind of keeps bumping up against what this film, I think, is fundamentally trying to do and what the original vision was for it. And you even feel it in the soundtrack, because this was originally scored by, where the hell is this? I'll get in a minute, by John Barry, like Oscar winner John Barry. Yeah. And they just said, it wasn't propulsive enough. It didn't work with the film. Obviously, this being an Eddie Murphy film, I think John Barry was probably scoring the idea of what this film was supposed to be. And instead, they moved, they changed the score to a very, I found it like aggressively 80s. Like to me, it actually sounded like the score from Kickboxer.
Yeah.
And to me, it was like straight away, it kind of tarnished the tone of this film and made for what ends up being an enjoyable but undeniably confusing film.
As you said as well, what they were hinting at within the script and within the film, and you've already mentioned his name, Chanda Jarrell. They're trying to hint at something as well with Charles Dance in the dream sequence, aren't they? Because he had trouble saying the Ajante dagger and Mr. Jarrell. Like he couldn't say his J's. Now, I don't know whether that was a problem with Charles Dance or whether that was hinting at something else. Like that's how you hint that it's a dream or something. Because did you pick up on that? When he says the Ajante dagger,
I didn't pick up that at all. I mean, what I did pick up was the fact that Charles Dance didn't look very fussed when he was acting in this film, and I think he said since that he didn't enjoy filming this, and that he didn't find it much of an exercise in acting. The only thing he enjoyed about it was acting alongside Eddie Murphy.
He didn't really move though. That's the problem. I mean, when he's the rat and he comes up, because the clunkiness of when he grabs the hook sword and then kills the guy and then goes back to being a rat.
Yeah, Peter Kwong, or Tommy Tong, isn't it? Yeah,
Tommy Tong, yeah.
Peter Kwong playing Tommy Tong. I love the alliteration of that.
When he comes up and he's a rat and he grabs the sword off him, and it's so clunky, and it's so like it's like it's done in two separate scenes. It's really weird.
It is, and it's a strangely directed film. And again, I think, as you already mentioned, it speaks to the kind of troubled production. I mean, this was eventually directed by Michael Ritchie, and I've got to be honest, it's a director whose name I wasn't aware of. But you go back through his kind of IMDb, and this is a guy who directed Bad News Bears, Fletch, Wildcats, even The Scout, which I've got a bit of a soft spot for. But again, that you can't escape the feeling that basically you wish you were watching the John Carpenter version. Of course, John Carpenter's not going to direct this. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you want to see the John Carpenter version of this, you just go and watch the far superior Big Trouble in Little China. But yeah, they just never committed in the same way that John Carpenter did in that film. But as I said, it keeps coming back to that bizarre aspect that despite the fact that that is such a better film, this was the one that was the hit. This film was a really big hit. Yeah. And yet John Carpenter's film just, as you say, didn't work at the time, but became this massive cult classic because it's fundamentally a much better movie. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this is a strange film, back to front, but because it's never quite committed to tonally to one side or the other, it makes for a quite bizarre watch, I found.
You mentioned him as well, Peter Kwong. We're going to have to finish what I'd like to call the Peter Kwong trilogy of 80s films.
Yeah, what's that? What's the third piece of the puzzle?
Big Trouble in Little China, The Golden Child, and Gleaming the Cube.
Oh, shit, we have to do Gleaming the Cube. Yeah. I mean, do we have to? That's a hell of a statement. We have to do Gleaming the Cube. I'm not sure if anyone has to do Gleaming the Cube, but part of me is kind of looking for an excuse to rewatch Gleaming the Cube.
Gleaming the Cube has to happen. He was, if I remember rightly in that, I think he might have been, just the bad kid, the one who killed his brother and stuff.
I haven't seen Gleaming the Cube since 1994. So God knows. If you say he's in it, I'm willing to believe you. But God, I remember nothing about the film.
Next week's film is...
Jesus, it feels like a bad... I mean, speaking of bad dreams, I mean, we should talk at least briefly about that dream sequence, because I think that kind of hints at what this film really could have been. I think it's the most bizarre sequence of the whole film. There's two parts of this film which really remind me of Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits. It's that part, when he's telling the jokes and it cuts to the live studio audience. Applause,
yeah.
Yeah, and the way that his goons are all dressed up, it totally had Time Bandits kind of vibe to it. And it was the same as the terrible, as good as that sequence is, because I love how they really go for the bizarro supernatural element in that part of the film. And you kind of have that mirrored with the sequence when he's going to get the Ajante dagger, and it kind of came across as a cross between the Time Bandits and the Last Crusade. However, it's if you wanted to know what The Last Crusade would look like if it was made on a budget of $7 million and had a decidedly not Spielberg, directing the film, that's what it would look like. Because I mean, there's a sequence. Obviously, you have all those sticks and there's no floor, and you do get the great bit with Eddie Murphy. There's no floor and all that, but there's really no sense of risk. I know something explodes, but there's one point when he stands there and says, "How many people have survived this?" And he says none. And I'm like, who are these idiots who have all failed this, let's be honest, really rudimentary and very short test?
How How did that explode?
I have no idea how that exploded.
It's like a Simpsons episode where a car stops and explodes. Like, there was no reason for that rope bridge to explode.
Like, they're trying to add threat there where it doesn't exist, because it's just like, oh, very simple balancing. Okay, fair enough. So we're like, well, what are we going to do about this bridge, which really doesn't provide any threat? We'll have it explode after he's been on it. Okay. So now they're adding like, oh, well, we've got to add a mystery to this. Oh, so water, fire, water. Don't spill the water. What should I do? I have no idea. It's like, come on, Eddie. Come on, buddy. You don't need to think this through. It's pretty obvious. Drink the goddamn water.
Which, dude, he did spill, mind.
He did spill a couple of times.
At least 2 drops fell on that rope bridge.
Well, the thing is, he clearly didn't need all of it, did he? You think about, like, exactly, if that scene is done correctly, what it looks like is the end of The Last Crusade. Like, that's what it should look like. Instead, we get that with, like, the dodgy 80s lighting. It's kind of, well, even if you do it, to a relatively competent level, it at least looks like the Goonies, but it doesn't even reach those kind of lofty heights, Also,
the rope bridge exploded. So after he got the dagger, how did he get out? Like, was there a side entrance he could have just come down and grabbed the dagger from?
I have no idea. There are, like, the problem is this film, the longer it goes on, arguably the worse it gets. Like, as it races and it really does sprint towards the finish line, it all starts falling to pieces. Like you've already mentioned there, the fact that he just suddenly starts following a bird for what feels like around the block, and he suddenly gets to the mansion. The whole bit with the dagger doesn't really have any sense of threat. I kind of like the stuff when they went back to Tibet, even though they clearly didn't go to Kathmandu. That was clearly filmed on set. But I think they did have a secondary unit who actually went to Kathmandu. But again, I'm not convinced any of that really worked. And then you eventually get to the terrible Charles Dance CG demon thing.
Yeah.
Which I've got to ask a question. There's a bit before that, when the film really goes bonkers, because, the dream sequence is really when you're like, okay, they're really swinging for the fences here. But just before that, they go full Spawn, where Charles Dance, like, the wall disappears, and he's talking to, like, what appears to be the devil or a demon. But that whole concept then just disappears. Like, that character he's talking to, what the hell's going on there?
I have no clue. Like, it's hinting that the golden child is the bringer of, like, they've had many golden children who all bring something. Like, the second golden child was like the bringer of truth, or what, I can't remember what they said. So maybe this is like if that's the golden child, maybe you have the dark old man. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's just not explained.
They are hinting that it is. They are hinting that it is the devil or something like that. But then, when you get to the end of Charles Dance, Chandler goes in to take him out, and he turns in. There's no explanation, there's no hint as to why all of a sudden, like, he's literally there, he's just sat there, he sees Eddie Murphy, and then all of a sudden he's now that weird winged creature who would have looked good in Willow, by the way.
Yeah, and I appreciate it's 1986, but it's full-on Harryhausen style special effects, and it just doesn't work there. The design of it is just, it's not threatening at all. It just looks ridiculous. And as we've mentioned with the Beverly Hills Cop podcast, like, Eddie Murphy's at his worst when asked to do action. Like, at this point in his career, he's just not convincing doing action. Like, all the best stuff, you just wish instead that there was more stuff, rather than having the big CG demon at the end, more stuff with him and Charles Dance. Like, when he comes back from Tibet, I love the scene when Charles Dance is there with the cops. And he's like, talking about my brother Numsi.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, Numsi. I have stolen from my dear, sweet brother Numsi. I am ashamed. I should be flogged. I should be purged. Like, all that stuff where Charles Dance just stands there looking bemused. There's some of the best bits in the film. But instead, the finale, instead of having a legitimate showdown between Charles Dance and Eddie Murphy, they're like, listen, Charles Dance doesn't want to be on set anymore. So we're just going to replace him with a terrible winged CG monster and have that as... And, like, Eddie Murphy, again, doesn't do anything at the end of the film. like the demon flies around. He's the one that brings the building down on himself, and then he stabs him at the end. The most slow motion stab I've ever seen. Enough time for like a wry smile before work.
I thought that was an evil dagger, and it could only kill the golden child. It's just a mystic dagger. It doesn't kill anything.
It doesn't. Okay. Yeah, nobody has the answer to
one
that.
Thing,
maybe there's an answer in the original script, but it's not in this film.
Everything I couldn't believe in this film, because obviously it's mysticism and all that. Because I can't believe you can sell a woman for a pack of Virginia Slims and a quart of pork fried rice.
I mean, what's going on? And let's be. I know we're kind of cutting back to an earlier part of the film, but how lame was that? Like biker gang. Like that dude, like they're playing him off as being tough. He's like, I ain't telling you nothing. He gives him one unconvincing punch to the stomach, and he's like, I'm going to spill the beans immediately. It's like, dude, are you really in a biker gang? You're super lame. You're selling women for cigarettes. You're giving up the ghost to Eddie Murphy, who's, like you said, it's like 5'7", weighs $105. And it's just like, oh yeah, I am not messing with him. Jesus Christ.
And also, they were not the most convincing of biker gangs, were they?
They were not at all.
It's like I wouldn't even know, grabbing your granddad off the street and just pouring a cut on him and just saying, you're in a biker gang now. They did not look convincing. They didn't look like they knew how to ride the motorbikes for a start. And then when they're in that weird house and they're watching the rip-off of like Twisted Sister or whatever they're meant to be watching on TV.
Oh, Rat. Body Talk by Rat, yeah.
It was insane. And they're all getting into it and nobody can see Eddie Murphy coming through. And then obviously then you get and that's when you get Keenan come in and kick ass.
The thing is, a lot of these films I'm describing are films that come after it. Like Last Crusade, like takes an element of this film and just does it much better. I wonder if like Point Break is basically that sequence. You know, you think of like, the bit where Anthony Kiedis shoots himself in the foot. Like that is that scene with like legitimate threat, directed well, with, you know, real kind of threat, real convictions. And instead we get the 1986 version, which has got no threat. And it's like they were aware of it as they're filming. It's like, God, this scene isn't really popping. It's like, what can we do? We'll just pour water all over this poor girl's chest and make sure she's not wearing a bra. Nobody will really pay attention.
It's the dark undertones as well, isn't it? Because just before that, he's in the house where they found Cheryl Mosley's body at the back, and he finds the rice pudding, and when he puts his hands into the rice pudding,
that was a bit of a jump. Why he's suddenly randomly putting his hand in rice pudding, but sure.
Yeah, and it's blood. So obviously we all know why they sold, because they wanted a white girl, so they sold Cheryl Mosley to these, and they drained her of her blood. But like again, because it's a PG-13, you're not getting. They're not going into it. They're just saying, right, they fed her blood. Cheryl Mosley's dead. You put the connection together. But if they would have just had more from that script, it could have been such a darker film that I think.
Yeah, and I suspect the Mel Gibson version, the one based on the initial Dennis Feldman script, would be a much, much darker film. Like the fact of the matter is, as soon as they've got Eddie Murphy, they were just like, we've got to turn this into a comedy. And like, you always get it with films like this, where there's a late change of star or, you know, and a change of tone, is that those hints of darkness or of the film it could have been are always still there in the screenplay. They're never completely removed. So like you said, the way this movie starts, you're like, oh, you know, so especially, obviously I had an idea of where it was going, but I haven't seen this film for like 20 years. I was like, oh, maybe this really is more of a detective film than I remember. You know, when we talked about Beverly Hills Cop being that, it's not so much an action film, it's for the most part a detective film with quips. And I was like, oh, is this going to be more of a detective film? It's like, no, they abandoned that pretty quick for outrageous supernatural elements and you know, kind of like they didn't know sketches and stuff.
They didn't know what they wanted. It felt a bit mismatched. No. I mean, but look, I will go on record and say we seem to be dragging this film down a lot, and I still enjoyed the watch I had.
Yeah,
I still enjoyed the watch, but it's a good film. Well, it's a decent watch, but
yeah. It's a decent watch.
It could have been so much more. Watching it now, and I will say, I remember loving it as a kid. I watched it quite a few times as a kid. It used to be on Channel 3. Mum used to record it. We'd watch it. Really enjoyed it. But I hadn't seen it, and I think I mentioned it last week, hadn't seen it for double-digit years. It's been a while. And as I've gone back to rewatch it again, and as I grow older now, as I know more about films, as I know more about, well, anything, it falls short, especially in the pantheon of Eddie Murphy films. This definitely falls short compared to what else he does.
my relationship with this film is much like, I guess, history's relationship with this film, in that when I grew up, I preferred this to Big Trouble in Little China, because I was a massive Eddie Murphy fan, and I'm watching this.
I was Big Trouble all the way.
So I was very much a Golden Child film, because I never kind of, it never clicked for me. I only watched it once when I was younger, Big Trouble in Little China, and I was like, it was fine, but it just didn't click for me. And I think if I'd watched it 10 years later, when I eventually did, I ended up loving it. But I think like this, when it came out, I was like, oh, this is fun. This is throwaway, but it's easy to get on board with. So this was like my preferred film of the two for like 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
But then I just forgot. It's like, I don't feel the need to watch The Golden Child again. Whereas bit by bit, eventually I rewatched Big Trouble. I'm like, oh my God, this film is absolutely fantastic. And I've subsequently gone on and watched Big Trouble in Little China any number of times. Whereas The Golden Child, I was happy to just, up until this podcast at least, leave it relegated to history, as it were. So it is strange that certainly my own relationship with this film and Big Trouble mirrors what happened upon the original release. Everyone just went with the easy fun of The Golden Child over Big Trouble in Little China. But
and I appreciate,
the cream has rise to the top eventually.
Because Big Trouble in Little China did delve more and more into the Asian mysticism than this did. Like
this hints it, but it's much more surface level.
Like the hell of upside down people. You've got the hell of drowning people. Like in Big Trouble in Little China, there's a lot of hells. And
there is, and I think they imply that here, but they never have the kind of conviction to support it.
For a Western audience, I think this is more palatable when it was
100%.
released.
Yeah.
That's why I'm thinking to start off with this shot off. And you said it already. You said the cream rises to the top. But for a Western audience, I think if you're going along, Kurt Russell is a good actor as well.
Oh, he's great.
He's a great actor. Eddie Murphy.
Great hair. Oh, the hair. God damn the hair.
Eddie Murphy is on top of his game at this point. So it's a bit of a struggle who you're going to choose. And like you said, Eddie Murphy won out in the box office. But
yeah, but you've got to remember as well,
Big Trouble in Little China is the better film. And we, unfortunately, we keep comparing them, but they were both released the same year. They were both, were they released?
You can't help, they cannot not be compared. As simple as that. And again, as much as you think about Kurt Russell, like, you got to remember, again, from a 1986 perspective, Kurt Russell's always been a relatively decent-sized star kind of thing, certainly in the 80s. But we're talking about Eddie Murphy's a mega star in 1986. There's no two ways about it. Like, no matter how bad this film was, and like I said, it's not bad, it's fun, but it's not as good. This film was always going to make more money than Big Trouble. And that's why they actually rushed his production. And I think John Carpenter literally said, it's like, listen, we can't be out anywhere near Eddie Murphy. Not The Golden Child, Eddie Murphy specifically.
Yeah.
And that was the issue. It's like, this was released as an Eddie Murphy film in 1986 when he was one of the three biggest movie stars on the planet, probably. But, when you go back and look at these films, what you have, I think the fundamental difference is you have somebody who is showing complete conviction to his vision. Like, that is what you get with Big Trouble in Little China. For better or for worse, you are getting John Carpenter just saying, this is my vision for this film. Whereas The Golden Child is a mix of, it's not quite the original script. It's not quite what the studio wanted. It's not quite what Eddie Murphy wanted. Whereas Big Trouble in Little China, whether you like it or not, that is John Carpenter's vision. Back to front. And that's the reason that over time, and that's the reason fundamentally it's a better movie. But
if you look at the star power as well, you look at where Eddie Murphy has come from. 48 Hours, Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop. These were all films he did just before this. But then if you look at Kurt Russell, right, in 1982, he did The Thing. And then 1983, he did Silkwood. 1984, he did Swing Shift. 1985, he did The Mean Season. And 1986, he did The Best of Times. 4 films. If you asked me to list Kurt Russell films, I would never have listed these 4 films because I tell you right now, never heard of these 4 films.
Yeah, he just wasn't as big a star. And even like the one film that stands out there is The Thing. And do you know what The Thing was when it came out? It was a flop. Yeah. Like, again, The Thing falls into the exact same category as Big Trouble in Little China. It was a film that came out at a terrible time. It came out against E.T. This had the problem coming out against The Golden Child. And it was just like people just weren't interested with it or not ready for it, whatever way you want to put it. And over time, those are the films where you're just like, all right, you go back and watch The Thing. You're like, as much as I like Big Trouble in Little China, The Thing's a goddamn masterpiece. Yeah. It is a masterpiece of a film, but nobody went to see it.
You had to feel sorry for Kurt. Kurt Carpenter, I was going to say. John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. Because they did Escape from New York. It was great. They thought, let's do this again. We'll do the thing. Okay, it's come out a mediocre performance. But I love it. You love it. It's a great film. Again, as time has gone on, people have realized that this is a fantastic film. And they thought, oh, we'll try and beat what we had with the thing. We'll try and do it again. Let's do Big Trouble in Little China. And again, it fell short to the box office. But as it moved on, it was fantastic. And I realize we've gone back now, and this Golden Child podcast has become a Big Trouble in Little China Part 2 podcast. But
it has a little bit.
But what I'm saying, yeah, this film, Golden Child, did fantastic when it was released, but it couldn't hold on to it. And you rewatch it now, you understand why it, as you've already said previously, it's fallen in the wayside. It's just fallen into the annals of time.
I was worried going back to this film because I thought we were going to have another Inner Space situation where, going back to a film which I had very fond memories of growing up, and a lot of my friends, and a very similar kind of narrative to Inner Space. All my friends like, oh, I remember watching The Golden Child back in the day. I used to love that film, but I used to love that film because I haven't seen it for 20 years. And obviously we went back to watch Inner Space, and it just didn't hold up at all. And it really kind of did. I had these rose-tinted glasses on. I was like, oh, this film just doesn't stand up. Whereas this film was almost exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was fun. I had no kind of expectation that this was going to be a fantastic film. Even growing up, I knew it wasn't a great film. Yeah. I just thought it was a fun film. And going back, it's exactly what I remember it being. It hasn't changed my opinion revisiting this film. It's like you said, it's not a great film, but it's a fun watch, and that's all it is. And that was all that had to be in 1986. If you're making a film in 1986 with Eddie Murphy, all that had to be was decent. And it's like, as long as you're just giving a vehicle for Eddie Murphy to do his thing, which they did, it was going to be a big hit, which it was.
The Charles Dance demon didn't hold up effects-wise. But I tell you what looked all right was Smoking Snake Lady. She didn't look that bad when they removed the weird silk sheet.
She was all I thought with that, she was another example of what this film potentially could have been. We talk about that idea of like the Chinese mysticism being pushed aside. Like, it's there in this film, but it's just not given much of an explanation. Like, a lot of those elements, like when they were talking, what's his name? James Hong.
Yeah.
James Hong, when he's talking about her, he'll deliver this like really what feels like an important piece of exposition about why she's there, what's going on. And then it cuts away so quick. Like, the film's in such a rush to get away from it. Like, okay, we have to have a line to explain why there's a snake woman here, but then we're going to move back to Eddie Murphy's hijinks as quickly as possible because we don't want to deal with it. But it's strange that you actually picked that out as one of the more impressive special effects. The one that stood out for me was the needless, but still very impressive Pepsi can dance. It doesn't belong in this film, but it's really
I wanted
good.
to mention, as a kid who was brought up in Tibet or wherever he was brought up, with no TV whatsoever, where did he learn to make the Pepsi can do that specific dance?
He's a magic kid. I think so many of these things you just say, oh, he's a magic kid. That's it.
All right.
There's no explanation.
Everyone, like, this is one of the biggest facts, most well-known facts that everyone knows. The Golden Child was played by a girl.
I had no idea.
Did you not?
Until yesterday.
Okay.
I had no idea. That girl looks so much like a boy.
So it's the most well-known fact except for you.
Yeah, I totally didn't know.
Did they hint did they say it's a boy in the film?
Yeah, I think they do.
The Golden Child, like, is this child asexual? Like, they don't give it the.
I think they very much no. They imply that it's a boy, and I think they were selling the idea that it was a boy because
when I rewatched it, I missed because I was looking out for it whether they called the child a boy or a girl, but I missed it.
They even shortened the girl's name down to, it was like JL instead of her real name.
Yeah.
So like in the credits, so that people didn't realize that it was actually a girl. And I was like, fair play. I didn't realize. I just thought it was a boy. It looks like a boy.
Okay.
Kind of, like later on in the film when he's not in his Golden Child garb, when he's got a t-shirt and he puts the cap on him and stuff. Fair play. It looks like a boy. That kid's actually really good in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
there's too much to do with.
She hasn't got much to do except for sitting down, but she seems to handle all the pieces really well, and she does really well with it.
Yeah, there's a certain screen presence to the character and the way, like you say, not many words, but even just the way that she looks Like, you just buy her as this kind of like this strong presence in the film.
Yeah.
But between the fact that, I was finding out that was a boy, and the fact that I've just found out, that was a girl, and that just today I'm finding out that Charlotte Lewis was 18 when she made this film? 18. I'm still getting over that, to be honest. Dude, she looks so grown up.
Yeah.
Crazy.
She had a bit of a bad one, because she did Pirates, with a Roman Polanski film before this. And in like 2010, I think she called him out for sexual abuse.
Oh, no. Well, Roman Polanski does have previous, to say the least, but that's not cool.
What was that? So Roman Polanski was 1983. She was born in 67, so she would have been
16.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I was going to say, I think we've covered most of this film, but now we're ending on Roman Polanski being an absolute dirtbag, so that's fantastic. But, let's, on a more positive note, let's list 3 things that we did indeed love about this film. So, I mean, I've got the obvious one is Eddie Murphy still. I mean, he's what makes this movie tick, although subsequently I would be interested to see the non-Eddie Murphy version of this film, see how it turned out. I've already mentioned it, but the dual movie style, the fact that this was released alongside, like, how crazy is it that we're basically making 2 versions of this film, the same film, the same year? It's like, I can accept a universe where they're making 2 asteroid films, or they're making 2 volcano films, but 2 bizarre Asian mysticism films like the same year? What the fuck are the odds of that? Absolutely insane. And number 3, I've got the dream sequence, which I wish more of this film was like. I'm like, if only... as we said so many times, John Carpenter was directing this film, or like that sequence, if Terry Gilliam had directed this film, I'm like, this film could have been so much more interesting than it was. And I feel like that sequence in particular is a hint of what it could have been. And it's a bit of a shame it didn't, kind of have the conviction to go down that route. But hey, I still love that scene in and of itself. And one of the reasons is because you're getting Charles Dance and Eddie Murphy. So a lot of the best scenes of those 2 playing alongside each other, and it just wasn't enough. And that's the biggest issue with the end of this film, because they remove Charles Dance and make him a silly flying demon. But hey ho.
For me, Victor Wong. I think Victor Wong's great in it. When he makes me laugh. Like when Eddie Murphy is trying to get his money back, and then he stops speaking random, and he just goes, "Get off my back," or whatever he says, and he's just being
I love the face he pulls.
Yeah.
Like that vacant look in his eyes. He's so good in that. How have we not mentioned him? Unbelievable.
I always like Victor Wong. Secondly, Eddie Murphy. I will say Eddie Murphy. I enjoyed Eddie Murphy in this film.
No, he's great.
Tibet. Like when they go there, and I don't know if they filmed in there or what they did.
They filmed it in Nepal at Kathmandu. Okay. So the close-up scenes with Eddie Murphy, he isn't there, but a lot of the wide shots are still very much in Kathmandu.
The location of it, because snowy covered mountain, I think it's beautiful. I think it looks absolutely stunning. So for me, it's the actual location of Tibet as well. I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. In terms of hate, I mean, speaking of Tibet, I mean, I'm not sure if it'd be Nepal Airlines or Tibet Airlines. I guess it'd be Nepal Airlines, because that's where they're flying into Kathmandu initially. But my God. Like, even the air hostess is smoking a cigarette. It's ridiculous,
And your in-flight meal is chicken feet.
Yeah, chicken feet. And then they get to Nepal, Kathmandu airport, and it's Jesus Christ, they really do go all in on saying this place is an absolute, dump, basically.
It's basically a cattle market, they were calling it.
It is a cattle market, yeah. So their take on Nepal Air is a little bit suspect. The fact that it's not as good as Big Trouble, you can't escape that. And I've already mentioned it, but Numpsy as a demon, I absolutely hated that. Oh, and maybe I could say Eddie's hat. I'm not getting on with Eddie's hat at all. So there's 4 things for you, but hey ho.
The look of Charles Dance as a demon, Numpsy, I wasn't a fan of. I'll go with that with you on that. The quickness, however long it took him to fall in love, I can't get on with.
The brevity of their relationship.
There you go. I can't get on with how quick it took them to fall in love. Like,
no, I didn't buy the relationship at all.
To fall in lust, yeah, maybe to like each other, but to go straight to "I love you," like, is she loving the fact he's the chosen one, and she's like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So she goes from cold to like completely head over heels in love, like that, at the flip of a switch.
Again, the speed that they took to end the film. Like, they spent all this time, because I watched it and I'm like, oh, we've only just got to, it's an hour and a half film. We've only just got to Nepal and we're in 55 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the speed of time it took, like she's been shot with a crossbow now. She's dead until she's only half dead until the sun. As Princess
Until
Bride,
the sun goes down, like the sun's on her toe, basically. Yeah. It's like you could just move her down in the room. She'd have sun on most of her leg then, but hey, or whatever.
As in the Princess Bride, she's only half dead.
She's only half dead.
Yeah,
of course.
So, and then all of a sudden, then he's able to find and locate the golden child by the bird. Like I thought that like as a plot device to move it on, it was just I wasn't a fan of that.
No, and the thing is, I mean, like I like the idea that a lot of these films are so committed to being 90 minutes long, but this is one of those movies that needed that extra 10, 15 minutes. It just needed a bit. There's so much going on. They're delivering such a unique world. I mean, it's not that unique, again, because Big Trouble in Little China had just come out, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty unique world. And they just don't give it the time. Like the relationship needed more time. The world building needed a bit more time. And certainly the ending needed to be fleshed out a bit. But there's a few problems with this film. And I think one of them is the fact that it could probably stand to be an hour and 45 rather than an hour and 30 on the nose, as it were.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that takes us to facts. Again, there's quite a few facts for this film. I was quite surprised. Do you want to start them? Or
we've already covered quite a few. I mean... Mm-hmm. By all means, go through. Let's do something a little different, shall we?
Yeah, go for it.
Let's not reiterate the facts we've already said during this film.
Yeah. Let's just we're going to ignore anything we've covered. Just consider it covered. We're not going to go back through those. But I mean, to take one, I mean, when he's on air Tibet and he's got the earphones in and he's obviously being forced to listen to air Nepali, local Nepalese music. He actually said, and he was like, he actually says Eddie Murphy is a cool man.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'd never noticed it before, but my wife pointed out. She's like, did he just say Eddie Murphy is a cool man? And we rewound it. And Eddie Murphy is a cool... I was like, yeah, he totally does. Absolutely bonkers. What else is there? That's it for me. I mean, you just mentioned about not rehashing any facts we'd already talked about. I've got 4 other facts. We've mentioned them all. So I'm done. I'm clean out of facts, dude.
I haven't got many more to go as well. I got an interesting one. Okay, George Miller was Eddie Murphy's first choice for director. George Miller of Mad Max fame.
Oh, cool, yeah.
Or Babe fame, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
He turned it down because Murphy kept him waiting at a meeting for 4 hours. Come on.
Can't do that to Eddie Murphy in 1986.
Dude. No, Eddie kept
Eddie did that
George Miller waiting for 4 hours.
Yeah, I mean, if that way round, it's a bit more understandable. But yeah, if you really want George Miller to direct your film, don't leave him waiting for 4 hours. Like, come on, Eddie. And that, again, George Miller's a great director.
Yeah.
Great director. I'm not shitting on Michael Ritchie. He's obviously made good films. But again, you think... the Mad Max films in particular, certainly you suspect the action, if nothing else, is going to be more impressive. Yeah. There would definitely be better cars if George Miller were in this film. The cars in this film are dog shit.
Because Mad Max 1 and Mad Max 2, well, Mad Max 1 definitely was done on indie filmmaking.
Yeah, 100%.
They couldn't get filming rights for like the car crashes on the motorway, so they would film when cars would come in or police would come in, they'd stop. Yeah, and they go back to filming again. They do it at night.
Proper guerrilla movie making.
Yeah,
100%.
Eddie Murphy turned down a role in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home in order to make the film. Both of the films were released on the same day. The teaser for this film was shown before Star Trek IV. I thought that was interesting because you've already said that he turned down a load of films.
Yeah, loads.
He turned down Star Trek IV, and they were both released the same day.
Who would he have been? Would he have been? I guess he would have been in the modern day.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, fair play. Like Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is a really fun film, and because that is a tonal shift away from the traditional Star Trek film, I didn't know that at all. You're like Eddie Murphy in Star Trek usually sounds like a really bizarre fit. In The Voyage Home, it actually sounds like a perfect fit. It's easily the funniest Star Trek by a country mile. Very much playing into that fish out of water. And if you suddenly have Spock and Kirk playing up against Eddie Murphy in what would have been modern day New York, I think. Oh no, San Francisco. Sorry. Yeah, that would have totally worked. Now I'm like, fuck the Golden Child. I want to watch A Voyage Home with fucking Eddie Murphy in it. Damn, you are blowing my goddamn mind today with these facts. These are good facts.
After this film, Eddie Murphy would write his next 5 movies in a row until The Distinguished Gentleman. I do like that. Like, I feel like he enjoyed the script of this, and then it wasn't what was on screen. So he thought, fuck that, I'm taking control. This is mine.
Maybe he got a bit too big for his boots, because I don't know, man. I mean, it's weird. I mean, we've talked about before, Eddie Murphy's had the weirdest career in so much that he's always been successful, but critically, god damn it, dropped off a cliff.
Last one for me then, because we've said them all. The house that Eddie Murphy stays in after his return from Nepal is the same house that Steven Seagal uses in Hard to Kill to recuperate from his coma.
What, at the end of the film, yeah?
Yeah, so the house where she gets killed in.
Yeah.
That's the same house in Hard to Kill in 1990. Like, what a random thing. I
thought you meant the mansion at the end of the film. Like, in my head, I was like, is this the same mansion from the end of Beverly Hills Cop or Scarface? You know, they all look the goddamn same, these big white buildings. But God knows. The thing is, we're going to run through the end of this pretty quickly now, because we've already covered the score, so we don't need to, we've already mentioned Brat and Body Talk as well. Legacy, again, we've already covered that, because again, the legacy of this film is that it doesn't really have one. Like, historically, at least, it's had its lunch eaten by Big Trouble in Little China. There's no escaping that. It's a movie that was a success of its time. People liked it, and then it's just been forgotten. Like, there's no clamor for a Golden Child 2, I don't think, put it that way. And yet, in terms of video games, there wasn't a video game. I don't think this movie needs a video game. And to be honest, in my ongoing efforts to now bring up Naughty Dog on every single podcast, when the only thing I could think of when I thought of video games in this film is how great the Nepal sequence is in Uncharted 2. That was the only thing that popped into my head, but I don't think Naughty Dog needs to make a Golden Child video game. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty much done.
Are you saying that after nearly a year of doing this podcast, you're finally into you're taking Rob's advice on board and gone Naughty Dog all the way? That's how
I mean, there's no escaping it. I mean, every week now, I said this is the last 2 weeks I've gone full in on Naughty Dog. Don't get me wrong, I still think a Naughty Dog Indiana Jones game would be fantastic. I think more importantly, what we can take from this is that, excuse me, we don't need a Golden Child video game. I just don't think that needs to exist at all.
I wouldn't even be able to tell you what I would want to see from a Golden Child video. I'm trying to think back now, and I know we've said it already that it's become the Big Trouble in Little China podcast. I'm trying to think back to what I wanted from a Big Trouble in Little China game. Because what I will say is, if you want to know what I want from a Golden Child game, go back to that episode and see what I wanted from a Big Trouble in Little China game, because you'll probably just rehash it and change the main character.
Yeah, I'm wondering now. I'm going back to the first thing that popped into my head, because it's like, all right, you want something where you can have a bit of action, but it's largely narrative driven. And I think this works for both the Golden Child, but let's be honest now, we're really talking about what we'd want to see, again, from a Big Trouble in Little China video game. And I can't remember what I said on the actual podcast first time around, but what I'd want is BioWare to basically make Jade Empire, but modern day. So you've got the Chinese mysticism, but it stars either Kurt Russell or Eddie Murphy and is set in 80s America, either San Francisco or LA, basically. And you go down that route. So you have those dialogue options, and you get to have the fantastic Kurt Russell or Eddie Murphy dialogue, but you also have action sequences. And I like the fact that you could actually animate Eddie Murphy in particular really poorly for action sequences. So he's winning fights, but he's doing it really poorly. Because let's be honest, he does not look convincing in action sequences. No, I'm not buying a Platinum Games version of this where Eddie Murphy is just kicking everyone's ass. I want him to look clunky as fuck.
In that case, then, just take any character from Streets of Rage and put it into this game, and you would have Eddie Murphy's fighting.
yeah, that's not far off at all. Jesus Christ. So I guess that's pretty much it for the film. So as usual, at this point, it's like, do we recommend? How would we rate it? Personally, I still think, despite its myriad of faults, I think this just about scrapes 3 stars. I mean, I'm not going to lie. If I was using the Rob scale, it's a 2.5 for sure. And I kind of want to use 2.5 because it is. But if I'm forced to round up, and let's be honest, I'm the only person forcing myself to round up.
The only person who's got a gun to his head right now is you.
Is me. I'm just pointing a gun at my own head. Yeah. Make a decision, Pritch. Make a fucking decision. 2 or 3, you pussy. I'm going to round up because I love Eddie Murphy so much. So I'm going to say it's a 3-star film. As for recommend it, I mean, I would say to my friends who have already seen it, who have fond memories, if they're like, should I watch this again? I'm like, yes, because it's almost certainly exactly the same as you remember. It wasn't a great film then. It's not a great film now. But as you said earlier, it's a fun watch, and it still is. So I'm going to just about say yes, just.
So 2.5
You're right.
It is
for a gun.
It is.
It's 2.5.
I've taken the gun away from my head. It is definitely 2.5.
There's no need for the gun. It's a 2.5.
Yeah, and would I recommend it? Like again, like you, I would recommend it to people who have a passing knowledge of this film anyway, not to somebody brand new to this style of film. Like
no. Yeah. Someone's like, "Oh, dude, I just watched Norbit. What should I watch next?" It's like, dude, you should watch The Golden Child next. There are better Eddie Murphy films to watch, but there are worse ways to spend 90 minutes. That's for sure.
Yeah. So that was The Golden Child. It went up and it went down. We had a bit of a roller coaster with that one. I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun, and that's the whole point. It's like that interesting thing of, so many of these films you go back, oh, it's as good as we remember, or it's, in the space we mentioned earlier, it was disappointing. This is exactly as bang average as I remember it being back in like the late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, nothing has changed there. So although we have definitively stated for the record that it's no Big Trouble in Little China. If anything, if there's one thing you take away from the Golden Child podcast, is that you should definitely watch Big Trouble in Little China instead. 100%.
Oh, we're going to make some enemies. I have a feeling we're going to make
some enemies. No. There's no enemies of Big Trouble in Little China. Oh, except for my wife. She fucking hated it. So there you go.
So is my choice, but next week is also our year.
Your anniversary?
Yeah, our anniversary. I was going to say birthday.
It's so romantic.
Yeah. It's our anniversary. It's a year of this podcast, but it's also my birthday.
That is a lot of shit going on.
There's a lot of shit going on. So as it's my birthday, as it's a year, and as it's my choice, we've actually discussed this off camera or off podcast, that we're going to push the boat out and maybe go a bit more modern. Because just do what you want. If you can't do any film you want on your podcast, on your birthday, on our year anniversary, then when the fuck can you do it? You pick what you want, sunshine. Because the week after that, then it's your birthday, so you're going to go a bit more to what the kind of film you want as well. So
yeah, I'm going to pick
next two coming up where we're not
definitely
where we might not be covering 80s or early. We're definitely not covering any 80s or 90s films next week, because.
Spoiler alert, my film is a 90s film. Just about, but it is a 90s film.
Trying to think of a film that I really enjoyed, and the fact that I've heard now that they're actually remaking the TV show. Mm-hmm. I want to do Serenity.
See? Right. What the fuck? They're remaking Serenity? You just keep dropping these knowledge bombs on me.
Disney Plus is reimagining Firefly. Without Joss Whedon. I mean, we'll get
still going to have
Joss Whedon next week. But
is it going to have Nathan Fillion? Oh, we're going to talk. No. Let's save this for next week. Jesus Christ!
I will give you a little bit of tidbit. It won't have Nathan Fillion, but apparently it's going to have a Mal Reynolds.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm not sure about that. No. I'm not sure about that. All right, well, we'll talk about that next weekend. I can't wait for that because, much like yourself, I'm very much a brown coat. I absolutely adore Serenity and Firefly, but in particular the movie, which I think is low-key a bit of a masterpiece. But again, I've seen Serenity a lot, but I don't think I've seen it in the last 6 or 7 years. So I'm always looking for an excuse to rewatch Serenity. So I think this is going to be a really fun one to go back to.
It's going to be an interesting one to cover around the whole Joss Whedon-ness of it as well.
Yeah. And just a little spoiler alert to anyone still listening. If you're wondering whether we're going to recommend this to people, oh yeah, because there's going to be so many people who haven't seen Serenity. And I tell you what, I will just tell strangers in the fucking street that they should go and see Serenity because it is one of the best sci-fi films of the last 20 years. And yeah, I think this is going to be a really fun chat for your birthday. So totally looking forward to it, dude.
Yeah, cool.
Really good.
Happy days.
Yeah, but as always, thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for listening to The Golden Child. And, please join us next week for something of a special as we go back and look at 2005 some things. 2005. Oh my God, that's so long ago. 2005 Serenity. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Cheers. Catch you there. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Oh yeah, and before I forget, because I always forget, here's Rob telling you where you can actually find us.
Yeah, so we're currently on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Hey You Guys 80s or at Hey You Guys 80s. And we're also on email at heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any emails, any recommendations, or any reviews you have. But whilst we're on about that, wherever you get your podcasts, please also smash the subscribe button. Yes, I said smash.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Leave us a review and leave us some 5-star ratings as well. But make sure they're 5-star ratings.
Yeah. We're not interested in 1 star.
5-star. If it's not going to be 5-star, don't go smashing anything. Just leave your opinion to yourself. 5-star ratings only. But yeah, if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.